Okay, well, hello and welcome back to lesson 9.2 on the metric system. So in 9.1 we talked about the basic units of the metric system, and we talked about the three different kinds of things I can measure. So if I'm measuring the length of something, I'm going to measure it in some sort of meters. It could be millimeters or centimeters or meters or kilometers, depending on how big or long the thing is. Okay. The second unit that we talked about is for capacity. Capacity is how much liquid something holds. So in the customary system, we have things like teaspoons and tablespoons and cups and pints and quarts and gallons. Well, in the metric system, and that's all we're talking about right now, is the metric system, everything is based on the basic unit of liter. Okay, now a liter is about the same as a quart, and if we want to break it down, we could talk about centiliters or milliliters or kiloliters if I want really big amounts. Okay, so again, distance is measured in meters. Capacity, how much something will hold, is measured in liters. And then finally, how much something weighs is actually a measure of its mass. How much stuff is it made out of, and how heavy is that stuff? So if you're made out of if you take a box full of feathers, it's not going to weigh, or it's going to weigh an awful lot less than a box full of dirt. Okay. In either case, what we're measuring is the mass, and mass is measured in grams. Okay, and we actually saw that on our Chapter 8 test in the word squares. We saw that the unit for mass, the basic unit of mass in metric, which was kind of the hint I gave you, was grams. Okay. Now what we're going to learn in this lesson is a little different. So that was just a quick review of 9.1. So we're still in the middle of the metric system, but now we're going to learn how to change from one metric unit into another. So let's say I measure something in centimeters, but it ends up being a really large number, and I want to change it into a little bit more reasonable measurement because it's so long it doesn't make sense to measure it in centimeters. So I want to change that measurement into meters. All right. Now I'm going to teach you a little historical fib here, but it'll be really, really helpful in helping you remember how to do conversions. And it's also going to introduce some other prefixes for the metric system that you might not be familiar with. So here's the basic fib. It's that King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk. Now that may be true, but I kind of doubt it. But in any case, King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk. We'll give you 7 very distinct places. Okay? Now, let's talk real quickly about what each of those places means. All right, now, each of these letters stands for a prefix, with the exception of the word by. Okay, and so by is kind of the 9.1 lesson. That is going to be the basic units. Okay, and so that's the stuff that we talked about just a second ago, and also in 9.1. So if we're talking about mass, we're talking about grams. If we're talking about capacity, we're talking about liters. And if we're talking about distance or length, we're talking about meters. Okay, and again, remember, we always capitalize the L. Why? Think. Because if we don't, it's going to look like the number 1. Okay, so wherever we see liters, we always capitalize it. Everything else is a lowercase letter. Another thing that's a little confusing, you might notice that I've got 2 D's up here. And they're both pretty obscure units. We don't use them very often. But the D on the left is called deca. It's D-E-K-A. And the D on the right stands for deci, D-E-C-I. The remaining units, K, you're probably familiar with it. You see it in kilometer and also in kilogram, but there's also something called a kiloliter. So the K stands for kilo. That's the biggest. Basically, it means 1,000 basic units. Okay, so a kilogram or a kiloliter or a kilometer is 1,000 times bigger than a basic unit. We'll talk about that in a minute. The H actually stands for hecto. Okay, and then over here, these are the ones you're most familiar with, especially when it comes to length, centimeter and millimeter. Okay, and all the things on the right represent decimal portions, just like a decimal number. So think of the basic units, like the ones column. Deci would be the tenths column. Okay, so the decimal kind of go right there if this was a number. So deci means tenths, centi means 1/100ths. I'll actually write this in. Okay, milli means 1,000ths. Okay, deca, on the other hand, would be the tens place, and hecto is the hundreds place. Okay, now, the reason King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk is so useful. is what we can do using King Henry is that we can convert from one unit to another simply by counting. All right, now let's talk about a couple practical things before we get started here. Back to the basic units. The ones that you're going to see the most often are the basic units. So things like grams, liters, and meters. They're really down here. Okay, you'll see kilometers or kilo, any of these things, and you'll see centi, especially when we're talking about length, and you'll see milli. These are the ones we use most of the time, and so when you look through the book, these are the ones you're going to see over and over and over in the problems. Okay, the other ones do exist. Occasionally you'll see them, but more importantly, they exist in King Henry Died by Drinking Chocolate Milk because they're placeholders. All right, let me show you how this works. Okay, suppose I had something. Let's use my example that we talked about a second ago. Let's say I had 23,000 centimeters. Okay, well, that's a really huge number of centimeters. And if something is that long, measuring it in centimeters was probably not the best choice, correct? All right, so let's figure out what that would be in meters. So here's what you do. Okay, pretend you're a little frog and you're standing on the sea. Like, think of these as lily pads. I want you to hop to what you want to measure. So if we want to go from centimeters, which would be right here in the centi column, and we want to go to basic meters, that would be 1, 2 hops to the left. So what I want to do is I want to take this number down here, and I want to take my 23,000. I'm going to write it a little bit spaced out. I'm going to take my decimal point that was at the end of 23,000, and I'm going to do the same thing with it that I just did on the top, jumping from centi to deci to basic units. So I move 2 places to the left, and so I get 230 meters, which is about twice the length of a soccer field. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. All right, let's say I wanted to go a step further. Let's take, let's do this in a different color. Okay, so let's take that number, 230 meters, and let's change it into kilometers. All right, so now we're starting at meter. That's down here, basic unit, and I'm going to hop again to the left, and this time I hop 3 letters. I hop from B to D, and we're counting from letter to letter, not between the letters. That's a little confusing because the way we move the decimal point is a little bit different. So we take 230 again, okay, and we're going to hop 3 places. There's no decimal in 230, so we're going to hop 3 places. Now the decimals move between the numbers, whereas the King Henry Died, we move actually from letter to letter. Okay. Anyway, I move the decimal 3 points to the left and end up with 0.23 kilometers. All right. Now, actually, all 3 of these measurements are actually the same: 230 meters, 0.23 kilometers, and 23,000 centimeters. All right. If I want to go the other direction, one last problem. Let's go from centi to milli. Now that's 1 to the right, so now I take this and I move the decimal 1 to the right, which is going to add an extra place. Well, I'm going to take care of that extra place by adding an extra 0 in. So that's going to give me 230,000 millimeters. And make sure, if you ever see M, it means meter. Okay, so if you want to mean milli something, make sure you have double M's, or milliliters, ML. Okay, so that's basically how to do metric conversions. All right, so let's do a little bit of practice, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write down at the top of the screen, I'm going to write down King Henry Died by Drinking Chocolate Milk, and I'm going to put underneath the by, I'm going to put GLM to remind myself that these are my basic units, okay? And let's do a couple problems here quickly. All right, so let's change, and I'm going to stick to meters, but the exact same thing would be true if we're changing milliliters to liters to kiloliters. It'd be the same thing as if I'm changing milligrams to grams to kilograms. Let's just stick with the basic unit of meter for right now. All right, so let's change, let's do this the other direction. Let's start with 2.7 kilometers, okay, and let's change that into first meters, and then we'll change that into something else. Okay, so 2.7 kilometers, if I want to change it into some number of meters, what do? Well, I want to go from kilo to basic unit meter. So that's 1, 2, 3 hops to the right. So I'm going to take my 2.7. I'm not going to actually put the decimal dot there. Instead, I'm going to put my pencil right between 2 and 7, and I'm going to move 1, 2, 3 places, and I'm going to put a dot. Now, notice again, when I move the decimal, I move between numbers, but when I hop on the letters, I hop from one letter to the next. Okay, think of each letter like a little lily pad. All right, and the basic is a lily pad. So there's 7 lily pads in King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk. Now, I can't leave any empty little spaces here, so I'm going to put a couple extra zeros in there, and I get 2,700 meters. And it's always a good idea to rewrite it nice and neat and put a box around your final answer. Now, if I start with 2,700 meters, and I want to change that all the way into millimeters, all right, let's do that one in blue. So I'm going to start here with meters, and I'm going to move to millimeter. So that's 1, 2, 3 more places to the right. And so now I'm going to take the number 2700. There's no decimal in it right now, so I'm going to start right there, and I'm going to move that decimal 1, 2, 3 places to the right, and that's where it's going to end up. Again, I can't have any empty zeros, so I'm going to put that in, and that's going to be, if I put my commas in, it's going to be 2,700,000 millimeters. Okay? Now, the cool thing about metric conversion is it's much, much more straightforward than doing conventional conversions, because I don't have to multiply. There's no dimensional analysis. I don't have to multiply by a bunch of fractions. All I'm basically doing is multiplying or dividing by 10, which just simply moves the decimal left and right. Okay? So, all right, so I want you to, I'm going to expand this and use some other units, but I want you to go ahead and I want you to fill in a couple practice questions. And this is, we haven't done this in a while, so this is going to be one of those sections where I want you to pause quickly, write down the original number, and put an equal sign, and change it into the unit that you're supposed to. So here are a couple practice problems. Okay, so first go ahead and do these 2 problems, and then we're going to have 2 more on the following page. So go ahead and pause the video now, and use King Henry died. I'll write it one more time. Use King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk, and then always under the B, put GLM. Okay, that's all part of the basic units. GLM. I'm sorry, that's G is a little hard to read. Okay, in any case, so use King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk to solve these 2, and then just resume the recording and see if you're right before going on to the next screen. Okay, welcome back. For the first one, we're changing kilograms to grams, so that's 1, 2, 3 to the right, because grams is a basic unit. So we're going to move the decimal 3 to the right. And without even drawing it, I think you can see you're going to get 3.5 grams. So hopefully that's what you got. For the bottom one, we're changing centiliters. We'll do this one in blue, since it's liters, since it's capacity. Okay, and we're changing centiliters, which is right here, to basic unit liters. So that's 1, 2 to the left. So let's move the decimal here, 2 to the left, so 325. If I move the decimal from the right, which would be behind the 5, move it 2 to the left, I get 3.25. Okay? So hopefully you got those right, and that's how you do it with the arrows down on the bottom on the King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk. All right, 2 more, and then we'll be done. So 15 milligrams, change that into grams, and 3.2 meters, change that into centimeters. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video, do these 2, and then resume. Okay, so you should have written down King Henry died by drinking chocolate milk. And when you know that the basic units here are grams, liters, and meters, you don't really, I guess you could probably get away without drawing it. I don't have a lot of room here, so I'm just going to leave them off, but these go right here. Okay? All right, so milligrams to grams. Well, we'll do that in red. That's milligram to grams. Grams would be a basic unit because there's nothing in front of it. So that's 3 to the left. So I'm going to take 15, and I'm going to move the decimal 1, 2, 3, and since I have an empty space there, I'm going to get 0.015. And for the final one, changing meters to centimeters. Meters is a basic unit, and there's centi, so I'm going to move 1, 2 to the right. So take 3.2 and move it 1, 2 to the right. You end up with 320 centimeters. Okay? And these are your final answers. Okay? So, I hope that you got those right, and I think you're ready to practice converting. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Sorry for the length, and I will see you in class tomorrow where we'll practice these.